I've selected the readings this morning from the Quaker Faith and Practice of Britain yearly meeting. And if Fairview doesn't have a copy of the red book, you definitely should have one, because it just has fantastic quotes in it. And I realize that when I do the Quaker reading, I'm often drawing on people who haven't been around for 200 or 300 years. And I don't mean to imply that current day friends don't have something to say. So I've chosen two readings this morning that are a little more up to date. Certainly the first one is. This is a reflection on faith written by a British friend named Charles Carter in 1971. True faith is not assurance, but the readiness to go forward experimentally without assurance. It is a sensitivity to things not yet known. Quakerism should not claim to be a religion of certainty, but a religion of uncertainty. It is this which gives us our special affinity to the world of science. For what we apprehend of truth is limited and partial, and experience may set it all in a new light. If we too easily satisfy our urge for security by claiming that we have found certainty, we shall no longer be sensitive to new experiences of truth. For who seeks that which he believes that he has found? Who explores a territory which she claims already to know? Caroline Fox, when she was 21 years old, writes in her journal about her struggle through which a spark of true faith was lighted in my soul. The first gleam of light, the first cold light of morning, which gave promise of day with its noontide glories, dawned on me one day at meeting when I had been meditating on my state in great depression. I seemed to hear the words articulated in my spirit: live up to the light thou hast, and more will be granted thee. Then I believed that God speaks to man by his spirit. I strove to lead a more Christian life in unison with what I knew to be right, and looked for my brighter days, not forgetting the blessings that are granted to prayer. Wednesday night was a real challenge at Hope House. We had 6 guests, and I was the lead hostess on these nights. And my assistant hostess had been a hostess maybe twice before, 3 times before. And as the evening unfolded, I realized that she and I had different understandings of how to respond to some of our guests. So here we are, it's about 11 o'clock at night, and 4 of the gals have pretty well settled down and gone to bed. When the 2 I'm going to be speaking of, the first woman would make a sailor blush with her language, and her favorite 4-letter word starts with an F, and spoken very loudly and angrily at intervals that I couldn't quite figure out why they were coming when they did, bursting forth into the room. So I went over and said, told her that, asked her to be quiet, and she yelled and screamed at me and asked me if I owned the building or not, and I ignored that. And anyway, so I said, I will get out of your face if you will quiet down and be quiet, and went back and sat down. Then the second woman, who was new, started screaming. She was having nightmares, and she started off with things like, "Stop texting me. I don't want to be texted anymore. I've told you this." This is all at the top of her lungs. And then it was, "Oh no, don't do that. I don't want to do that." And it got progressively disturbing to listen to her. And so here we were with two women at 11 o'clock or 11:30 that were, to say they were obnoxious is not the right word, but to say they were certainly disturbing all of us in the room. And my co-hostess was all for exiting these two women. And we would have been following our own guidelines if we had done that, if we had exited them, because foul language is a good reason to be told, especially if they don't stop. So that would have taken care of guest number one, but guest number two was having these nightmares, and until she woke up, at least, her language was not obnoxious. So we could have exited them. Another choice that I felt we had was to ignore them. And we ignored for a while. And then one of the gals who has been coming for about 35 days now, no problem whatsoever, at one of these outbursts, suddenly sat straight up in bed and said, "What's going on?" It had really frightened her. So ignoring didn't seem to be the right choice either. And so here we were trying to decide whether we should do something, and if so, what should we do? And my co-hostess and I thought, well, we're not using the bed in the back of the building. Let's see if guest number two wants to go back and sleep back there. We'll still be able to hear her, but it should be a little less disturbing. So yes, she was willing to move. So we moved her back into the back bedroom, shut the door, and covered her up. And it wasn't 5 minutes before she was back having her nightmares. And so it was getting progressively challenging. Clearly, this was not going to solve itself. And so I thought, well, I'll go back and I'll sit with guest number two. And so I woke her up, and we talked for a little while, and I said, "Would you like a cup of cocoa?" And she said yes, and went and fixed her cup of cocoa. By the time I came back, she'd gone back to sleep. And so I went back in thinking, okay, that takes care of that. And then don't text me anymore. Stop that. I don't want to do that. So I went back, and I said, "Are you hearing voices?" And yes, I'm hearing voices. And they're all men from the church. And anyway, you get the gist of this. It's now midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And I went back and sat down, and I thought to myself, there is a way of being with people. They don't have to be in a situation as severe as this one, but because this one is very challenging. But there's a way of being with people that's termed a non-anxious presence. And I got thinking about my training experience and thought, can I do that tonight? Can I be a non-anxious presence? I was at a workshop one time where one of the attendees said, "I don't like the word non-anxious because I'm anxious. I think we ought to say low anxious or contained anxious, because you're always anxious to some degree." But I thought, okay, let's think about this non-anxious presence of sitting with people or being in a situation where there's a lot of tension and a lot of disruption and a lot of difficult things going on. And the basis for this kind of sitting with people or experiencing other people in your workplace or in the line at the grocery store, whatever, is that you, as the caregiver, as the person who's concerned, brings to this a process, brings care to the situation. But it is God who cures. And when we mix those up, which is what my hostess certainly was doing, and I was beginning to, you end up at a place where you think, I have got to fix this. I have got to do something about this. Your other choice is to say, that person has to do it. That person has to change. That person has to correct themselves. I'm going to throw her out, and then she'll learn her lesson and she'll change. And obviously, both of those have real drawbacks to them. And I think that if I could just get the right thing to do, we'd be all right. And so all the pressure's on me, and my co-hostess is telling me things that I know we're not going to do. And so I thought, okay, deep breath. This is non-anxious presence time, if we could do it. What is interesting, if you look at yourself the way you're responding, you can ask yourself some questions that really help prepare you to be a good listener, to be a good presence with somebody. And that is, what am I afraid of? Does anger frighten me? Do 4-letter words make me mad or horrify me such that I just can't stay around? In other words, look at your, what's my fear? What's my anxiety? And I can handle anger. I can handle, I've heard so many 4-letter words in my ministering in jails that that's no problem for me. My fallback is, I want to fix it. And you can't be non-anxious or low anxiety when all you're trying to do is say, what can I do? I tried the cocoa, that didn't work. So an ability to, if you look at your own fears and your own anxiety, what causes anxiety? What are you afraid is going to happen? Then you've got the start of being able to be a non-anxious presence. And another thing that a lot of us are concerned about in being with people is that you're going to say the wrong thing. I can't go back and talk to her because I might say the wrong thing and that'll set her off. Or I don't know how to talk and sit with somebody who's dying. I'm afraid I'll say the wrong thing. And as a non-anxious presence, what happens is the need that you feel to say something is lifted. Because the fact that you're there, that you're sitting with somebody, is huge. I mean, don't underestimate that. Even people in the hospital say, I don't want any visitors. Someone who comes in and just quietly sits there. If the person wants to talk, you can talk, but I think the just being there, our presence is really, really important. And one of my favorite biblical examples of that is Job and his 3 friends. And it's very short. It's in Job 2, verses 11 and 13. And Job all the bad stuff has happened to Job by now. It all happens in the first chapter. And so the poor man is just a wreck, and he's angry and he's upset and he doesn't understand what's going on, and he's in pain and he itches and you know, you get the picture. So Job's 3 friends heard of all these troubles that had come upon him. Each of them set out from his own home. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. I read that to Doug this morning and said, could you sit silently with me for 7 days and 7 nights? Or could I? I mean, it's an incredible sentence, I think, of once they open their mouths, Jove's friends begin to get it wrong. But now we're arguing with each other. But when you're sitting there for 7 days on the ground, probably, with this man helping to absorb maybe some of his pain, some of his questions, some of his anger, it doesn't say Job didn't say anything. I mean, Job might have been screaming and complaining and crying, and strong emotion is best met, in my experience, with silence. You can always get up and leave the room, but that's not particularly helpful unless you just feel you absolutely can't stand it any longer. But if the sitting with somebody is a very important thing to do, and I think should never be underestimated. So knowing your fears, what you're scared of, what's going to set you off is important in doing this. And remembering that this is not your responsibility to cure this, whatever it is. If you're in line at a grocery store and the woman in front is chewing up the poor clerk, you can be a non-anxious presence by just beginning to hold those two people in the light and pray for them. You can also grab the woman and tell her to shut up and quit treating the clerk that way, but I'm not sure how effective that's going to be. Now you're going to be in a fight with her. But again, this ability to be present without having to fix things is important. Another thing that I think is important, depending on not even so much depending on the situation, but particularly when someone is dying or when someone is ill, the first thought we often have is, I don't want to talk about that. That person doesn't want to talk about that. And I've learned that people do want to talk. And one thing you can do is, instead of saying, well, how do you feel about dying, is to say, if you notice someone is, I notice you're upset. Is there anything you want to tell me? Or what are you afraid of? And if someone says, oh, well, I'm afraid of dying, then you can talk about it. What do and a non-anxious presence is able to feel almost a topic that nobody else has wanted to talk about, or that the person wants to talk about, but really has not begun the conversation because they think you don't want to talk about it. So what I ended up doing with guest number 2 was the Cocoa Woman, was to go back and just sit beside the bed. And I told her I was there, and then I was sitting, and that I was going to stay there until she felt comfortable, because she said, I can't sleep. Every time I go to sleep, I'm scared they're coming after me. So I told her about the cameras that we had and how we could keep an eye on. Nobody was going to come in and get her. Did the sort of the logical stuff. And of course, in the back, there's a door. So I explained that the door was locked. You couldn't get in from the outside. You can't even open it from the inside, or let alone the outside. And so we did a little bit of that. And then she opened up and talked about sentences that didn't make a whole lot of sense, except that clearly something had happened that had set off these nightmares. And finally, after about 45 minutes, she stayed asleep. So I tiptoed back out in the other room, and everything was fine until 5 o'clock in the morning, when it was time to start waking up anyway. And so I'm not patting myself on the back so much as trying to help us think about ways that we can be in difficult situations. It doesn't always work, but this idea of being a non-anxious presence or a low anxiety is really a powerful place to be, I think. there are times when you can do something, when you can do action. And the story that I love about that friends taking action for somebody is when the 4 men bring the paralytic in and make a hole in the roof and lower him down. That story is in all 4 of the Gospels, but there's some differences in that story. And so I wanted to read Luke and Mark and Matthew's story about this healing. And in all of them, what I'm skipping is the argument that Jesus' healing on the Sabbath raises among the audience. Okay, so remember, they say you can't heal somebody on the Sabbath. And then in the Luke story, the interruption is when the paralytic then stands up and picks up his mat to carry it. You can't carry your mat on Sundays. So those interruptions I've left out because I want us to see the story the way it flows in terms of the people who are bringing the paralytic in. So Luke says, one day while he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting nearby. They had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem. And the power of the Lord was with Jesus to heal. And just then, some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a bed. They were trying to bring him in and lay him before Jesus, but finding no way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and let him down with his bed through the tiles into the middle of the crowd in front of Jesus. When he saw their faith, he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." I say to you, stand up and take your bed and go to your home. Immediately he stood up before them, took what he had been lying on, and went to his home, glorifying God. Mark says, when Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door. And he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man carried by 4 of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And after having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven. I say to you, stand up, take your mat, and go to your home." And he stood up and immediately took the mat and went out before all of them, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." Matthew says, and after getting into a boat, he crossed the sea and came to his own town. And just then, some people were carrying a paralyzed man lying on a bed. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven. Stand up, take your bed, and go to your home." And he stood up and went to his home. And when the crowds saw it, they were filled with awe, and they glorified God who had given such authority to human beings. What strikes me in this story is the clarity with which we see the difference between the process of sitting with somebody, of bringing somebody to Jesus, the caring for them, and the cure. The cure comes from God, from Jesus. And so there's no confusion here as to which is the care that we can give and the cure coming from God. The other thing that I noticed in this story is in all the instances, the response is to glorify God. So I'm reading into that when we sit with somebody, when we can be a presence with somebody, that is glorifying God in the sense that God is present and we acknowledge that presence by our presence. Some pastoral care people will tell you that you should talk about Christ and the healing process and all of that. That's certainly something that you can do if you're whoever you're with, if that's helpful, if that's comfortable. But I don't think it's necessary. As long as you are clear that God is present in the room with you, in the space that you are. And if we think of a triangle of God, me, you, and the other, as we're sitting with people, I think that keeps us, we feel the energy that is coming from God to us, from Christ to us. We feel the dynamic of us sitting with somebody. What we don't know about what's happening, unless there's something the other says so, is what's going on between the other and God. And God and the other could be engaged in a very engaging conversation or presence. In other words, God is present in the room with the other as well. So what had been on my mind was this experience of actually being able to try once again to step into non-anxious presence with a co-hostess who was ready to throw them out. And to the degree that the two women quieted down, you could say it succeeded, but I think it definitely succeeded in that the next morning, the woman that I had sat with remembered that and came out and said, I was having nightmares and I was afraid to be by myself. And that's all she said. The other woman never says anything except when she's angry. And so the fact that she didn't say anything and got out of bed, and when I said, you want a cup of coffee, I gave her a cup of coffee. So I would say that it was an evening worth having. When we sit like this, when we are a non-anxious presence, we are listening. It really is a time of listening, like we talked about this morning in Sunday school, because you are listening not only for what God might have for you, but for what the other person might say or do. I mean, it was obvious that woman number 2 was terrified and was waking up from nightmares. I mean, we could all see that. But I think the sitting with her and not letting her behavior scare me off was helpful. So anyway, that is what's been on my mind, and it ties in with some other thoughts I've had during the week on the importance of what we say and how we say it, what words we use, but that's a message for another time, I think.